The wind screamed down from the high escarpments like a predator unshackled, scouring the cliffs of Vorthyx Ridge with grains of iron-flecked snow. It hissed through shattered antenna masts and tore canvas from collapsed shelters, turning the outpost skeleton into a chorus of hollow howls. The storm was old, centuries old, per local meteorology logs, an artifact of Vorthyx's decaying moon and the planet's erratic orbital torque. Nothing here stayed still. Not the cold. Not the ground. Not the past. Sergeant Elias Holt stood unmoving in the lee of a half-buried comms dish, his armor dulled by years of frost abrasion and battlefield repair. Breath ghosted from his visor seams, freezing instantly. HUD warnings scrolled across his display: oxygen recycler degraded, reactor load critical, subdermal temperature sinking. He watched the ridgeline below without flinching. Vorthyx Ridge sprawled like a battlefield fossil, gouged terrain, ruptured pipeline trunks, the ribbed carcasses of terraforming engines half-submerged in glacial runoff. The slope dropped in a staggered descent of bunkers and collapsed maglev anchors, terminating in a chemical basin laced with abandoned crawler husks. 90 years ago, this had been an OR processor and UNMC surveillance node. Then the swarm came. Then silence. The drop shuttle that brought Holt had already returned to orbit per command protocol 2 minutes after offload. No backup. No orders. He hadn't argued. Command's own records showed Outpost K-7 as non-essential personnel decommissioned. And yet one line remained active in the manifest. His. He descended slowly, boots crunching over alloy and ice. Vorthyx's gravimetric anomalies warped terrain weight distribution, step wrong, and a femur snapped. Holt walked like he'd walked minefields. Quiet, precise, measured. He passed a rusted weather hour bent by wind shear, then knelt beside a half-buried door marked UNMC Engineering Auxiliary Sector 4. Frost blurred the stencil. The keypad sparked once, then died. Holt set a thermite breach charge and stepped back. The blast peeled the entrance open with a flash of light and a whimpering metallic shriek. Inside, the airlock yawned like a throat, stale and sour. Glow strips flickered along cracked bulkheads. Ceiling plates dangled. Holt moved through the entry chamber with weapon drawn. His shoulder brushed against a row of child-sized pressure suits, slumped and mold-streaked. He didn't look twice. The outpost interior was a time capsule of failure. Corridors warped by tectonic upheaval. Doors welded shut from the inside. Blast scoring and frozen blood along the walls. Scrawled messages etched by blade tip into polymer plating. They never stopped. The mess was a ruin. Trays strewn. Tables overturned. Holt paused by a corner where snow had drifted through a ruptured seal. There, embedded in the wall frame behind a child's bed frame, he found a small plastishard etched with colored graphite. A drawing. Crude. A figure in dark armor standing beside a taller, long-limbed shadow creature, both framed in a blaze of red lines. His jaw tightened. He left it. Vorthyx's light cycles were broken, sunrise and nightfall came without rhythm. A blue aurora flickered beyond the cracked observation viewport, lighting the broken remains of solar panels and antenna arrays with surreal luminescence. The operations center sat under a half-collapsed load-bearing girder. Holt entered through the rubble, forced power into the mainframe via data pike, and initiated a hard boot. System integrity, 12%. Viral rot and electromagnetic distortion pulsed through the logs. Swarm spores and neuropaths. Designed to melt software with the same persistence they used to unravel neural tissue. He worked around it. Medbay collapsed. Hangar decompressed. Orbital defense grid rerouted. Living quarters unsalvageable. Then the anomaly. Thermal signature 36.9 degrees Celsius. Sublevel 3. Beneath the power nexus. Not an equipment heat bleed. Stationary. Human range. Holt's eyes narrowed. No radiation leak. No venting. Just steady warmth. Too steady. He deployed a camo drone. It crawled into a fractured access tunnel, sensors low, transmitting monochrome feed to his HUD. Down through frost-choked ducts and repair chutes. A pile of chewed wiring. A discarded respirator mask. A handprint in ash. The drone twitched, then stopped. A blur. Humanoid. Small. Standing still at the far end of the shaft, bare feet, oversized coat, one eye reflecting the drone's IR beam. Then gone. Holt exhaled, barely audible. He rewound the feed. Frame by frame. A child. He pulled the drone back. Someone had expanded the sublevels. Manual excavations. Hidden caches. Improvised shielding. Old ration kits and a collapsed hydroponic array, brown and brittle. Holt recognized the desperation. Someone had tried to build a world underground after the surface had been lost. Someone was still alive down there. He didn't move yet. Outside, the wind thickened. Ice accumulation on perimeter sensors. Holt donned his helmet again and began reinforcing the choke points. Barricades repurposed from girder spines. Fuel lines rerouted for manual ignition. He found Mark III gravity mines in an Inuit crate, good condition. He placed them along the eastern pass where the cliffs curved inward. The ridge lent itself to defense. High ground. Narrow approaches. Legacy scaffolding with sniper nests pre-built into the design. Holt marked every fallback line. Reprogrammed the Holidable's tactical layout. Overlaid old battle telemetry from the outpost's last stand. The defenders had held for 42 hours. Just past midnight, something arrived. Motion ping. 10 meters. South ingress. Holt moved to position. It came in silent, jittering through the storm like a hallucination. The Screamer drone. Zerleth Vanguard class. 6 limbs ending in blade-like protrusions. No visible eyes, just sensory ridges laced with psionic receptors. Its carapace shimmered with reactive spores heat triggered. He waited until it stepped into the kill zone. The tripline mine exploded in a cone of kinetic shards. 3 limbs severed. The drone screamed not from pain but to signal. Holt finished it with controlled bursts to the thorax. Even downed, its body writhed. Filaments unspooled from the skull crest like tendrils seeking warmth. One wrapped briefly around his boot. He crushed the skull with the rifle stock. Then silence. At dawn, 2 more approached from different paths, testing, learning. The swarm never sent the same pattern twice. One came through the vent tunnel and tripped a chemical flare, the other clawed through subsurface ice and nearly breached the inner wall. Holt intercepted it beneath the loader crane and severed its head with a powered lift arm. The ridge grew quiet again. Holt stood in the drifted snow, armor streaked in ichor. His thigh plate was cracked. Blood froze over one glove. His breath stung inside the helmet. He counted rounds. Not enough. Behind him, Outpost K-7 loomed, frostbitten and waiting. He turned toward the sublevel hatch. Toward the warm anomaly. Toward the impossible survivor. Vorthyx Ridge had been dead. Now it was awake. And the war had found it again. Snow sifted through the shattered air vents of Outpost K-7 like ash falling through cathedral light. Beneath the surface, past the twisted ladder shafts and collapsed support rails, the outpost's sublevel 3 breathed shallowly, a forgotten lung of rust and silence. There was no central lighting. No ambient hum of systems. Just the low crackle of frost on alloy and the near imperceptible thrum of something moving. Holt descended by rappel cable, arms tense as the harness creaked under his weight. He'd mapped the shaft in fragments, old blueprints layered with the drone's partial feed. It had taken 2 hours to find a viable route through the fractures. Now the walls closed in around him, cold and veined with mineral striations that caught his headlamp like embedded scars. At the bottom, his boots touched down in slurry. Meltwater ran in thin rivulets across the floor, pooling around discarded piping and the mummified remains of coolant coils. Every step echoed back in brittle ricochet. The air tasted stale, carrying undertones of burned plastic and old antiseptic. A dead station artificially preserved. He stepped over a fallen bulkhead door and swept the beam of his rifle-mounted light across the corridor. Every meter of the passage bore signs of desperate habitation, cloth scrap insulation tied with signal cable, food tins punched open by hand, resin-cured wire clusters repurposed as heat traps. And names. Hundreds of names scratched into every surface. Some overlapping, some barely legible. None of them recent. Some repeated in erratic spirals as if the author had been clinging to memory while memory slipped. A name caught his eye. Cora. Etched into the lower panel of a storage crate followed by tallies in groups of 7. Time passed here. Not recorded. Survived. He passed an old bunk cubicle collapsed under mold rot. Inside, a pile of shredded data chips sat beneath a rusted wall projector. A fragment of image still flickered on loop, a cartoonish earth, rotating off-center, accompanied by a child's voice singing fractured lyrics about oceans and fields. He paused just briefly. Something inside his chest tightened, then receded into the usual place. He moved forward, deeper into the bones of the station. Near the core, he found what had once been a sub-generator housing. The room was sealed by a barricade of scrap metal, lashed shut with fiber mesh and fusion welded from the inside. The outermost layer had been scorched in places, likely by failed entry attempts. Not all of them human. He didn't call out. He approached and placed one gloved hand gently against the barrier. Silence. Then a scrape. Metal on stone. A shadow shifting just beyond the cracks. Then an eye, wide and unblinking, reflecting his headlamp. Human unmistakably. He didn't flinch. Instead, he reached up and unlocked the seal on his helmet. It hissed open. The cold stabbed through his dermal lining like needles of dry fire. But he pulled the helmet free and let the girl see his face. Pale. Scarred. Lines worn deep from frostbite scarring and sleepless years. No expression. The shadow didn't move. He sat down, knees protesting slightly in the cold. Set his rifle down beside him, within reach. He didn't speak. Just stayed. Above, the ridge stirred. A tremor shook the upper levels. Holt's wrist pad vibrated once, its signal link flashing. Seismic displacement, north tunnel, lateral movement. The swarm was probing new paths. Holt tapped a command code. On the surface, an old mining charge blew the east ravine inward, burying the access route under a curtain of snow, rock, and ferrocrete debris. The tremors ceased. He waited another 2 minutes, eyes closed, heartbeat steady. When he opened them, the barricade had changed. The top panel had been shifted. Slightly ajar. A fragment of face visible now, less obscured. A child's face, filthy, hair tangled, cheeks hollowed by hunger. Her eyes burned. He reached into his kit, removed a ration bar, unwrapped it, and placed it on the floor. Then a heat pack, self-warming, low yield. He didn't push them forward, just set them down. Then resumed sitting. She did not move. Not yet. But she didn't look away. The next 20 hours passed like fractured glass. Holt returned to the surface twice. First to repair a ruptured hose on the Ridge autocannon. The coolant had frozen in the upper manifold, disabling the gun's rotational sweep. He rethreaded the lines under storm cover, hands raw in sub-zero wind. He fired a single test burst, vaporizing a protruding rock spire for calibration. Second to the south tram wreckage. He scavenged a functioning diagnostic relay from a shattered med frame, likely from one of the last evac attempts. A skeletal body was still strapped inside, curled fetal in the passenger harness. Holt said nothing. Took what he needed. Each time he returned, the surface showed signs of disturbance. Tracks in the snow, some light and skittering, others wide and deep. Testing paths. Mapping wind patterns. The swarm always adapted. He noted new vector patterns. One route had been marked with biochemical trace residue. Swarm scouts were releasing spores to track human thermals. He logged every detail. He updated the schematic. He sealed another entrance. And then he returned. She was still there. The heat pack was pressed to the wall. Not used. But the ration bar was gone. No mess. No crumbs. Just absence. This time she didn't retreat when he entered. She was crouched behind the barricade, one hand pressed to the wall as if to feel for vibration. Her eyes followed him. Her body language said nothing, but her stillness screamed tension. He sat again. Silence. Then, softly, Cora. Not a question. Not a guess. Recognition. She flinched slightly. Then exhaled. Her fingers twitched. Still, she said nothing. But she didn't vanish. The barricade creaked. A panel shifted. And for the first time, she stepped out of the dark. Her frame was gone. Malnourished. Layers of oversized coats draped her like armor. Her boots were mismatched, likely taken from different corpses. Her hands were covered in soot and adhesive paste. But her posture was sharp. Trained. Not in the military sense, but in the way feral creatures learn motion through survival. She stopped 1 meter from him. No closer. He didn't move. They sat like that for a long time. Finally, her voice cracked into the space between them. Are you real? Holt blinked once. Then nodded. She looked past him toward the ladder shaft. Then back. Her voice was quieter now. Flat, toneless. Sometimes they take his face. Walk like him. Smile like him. I kicked one in the ribs and it sounded wrong. Holt said nothing. Not yet. The things down here don't bleed right. Her eyes flicked to his gloves, then the rifle. She paused. You smell like iron. Not rot. He opened a pouch and withdrew a filtered water pack. Extended it slowly, without pressure. She hesitated. Then stepped forward. Took it. Drank without breaking eye contact. Then sat. A distant thud rippled through the floor, a subterranean tremor, close. Not collapse. Movement. Cora stiffened. Her eyes narrowed. Holt drew his sidearm without a word and set it beside her, grip facing out. Not a test. A choice. She didn't touch it. But her hand moved closer. That night, the ridge shook again. But this time she did not hide. And Holt did not leave. The first true night at Vorthyx came without fanfare. Temperature dropped 43 degrees in less than an hour. Snowfall ceased, but the wind remained a constant force that scraped ice from the cliff's edge and drove sub-zero gusts down every exposed corridor. At night, the storm's voice changed pitch, a long harmonic wail that threaded through metal structures and forgotten antenna arrays like breath drawn through steel lungs. It sounded like a choir of machines remembering pain. Holt and Cora sat in silence beneath the outpost's collapsed substructure, one level above sublevel 3. He'd moved them to a tighter location near the old fabrication bay, shielded by centuries of fallen machinery and thick alloy walls that had once housed heavy mineral extractors. The chamber was narrow but defensible. Quiet. There were no working lights, only the pulse of the emergency backup system, low amber, cycling every 10 seconds. Each pulse threw their shadows in jagged silhouettes across the walls, shapes that grew and shrank like living echoes. Cora hadn't spoken since accepting the water. She sat cross-legged against a maintenance panel, cradling a thick piece of insulated wiring like a rope. Her coat still smelled of solder and old sweat. Her gaze remained fixed on the access tunnel, unmoving. Holt had seen that look before, children of war zones who'd lived too long in silence, trained to hear what others could not. He worked by headlamp, rifle disassembled and spread across an overturned crate. The weapon was still serviceable, but the barrel had shifted alignment after the last engagement. Holt adjusted its tension springs with methodical precision, fingers moving with the certainty of years. He knew every scar on the weapon, every millimeter of grip worn smooth by desperate hours. "They don't come until it's coldest," Cora whispered suddenly. Her voice sounded rough and used. The words dropped into the room like stones breaking a still surface. Holt didn't look up. He reattached the firing group and checked chamber pressure. "They wait," she continued. "Sleep inside the ice. I used to think they died during the day. But they listen. They wait for skin to freeze. For heat signatures to drop low enough to hide in. Then they move." He nodded once. Not agreement. Acknowledgement. She leaned slightly into the next amber pulse. Her face caught its edge, bones sharpened by malnutrition, eyes dulled by too much memory. "They're not hunting. They're searching." Outside, something howled against the southern windbreak. Not an animal. Just the wind. But they both turned instinctively. Reflex carved into bone. Cora didn't flinch. Hours passed like slow water. The cold settled in layers. Even beneath polymer weaves and heat pads, the chill soaked into muscle and marrow. Holt sealed the ventilation shafts with adhesive mesh and activated a low-yield radiant core barely enough to warm a handspan of air. It glowed with a faint chemical blue, casting warped shadows beneath their boots. Cora edged closer to it but never touched. She wrapped the insulated cable tighter around her wrist as if binding herself to presence. "They got through the western bulkhead once," she murmured. "Back when there were still 10 of us. It wasn't loud. It was like static. Wet static. And something sharp behind it." Holt reached into his pack, withdrew a ration bar, and set it gently in front of her. She stared at it without moving. "One of them took my brother's voice. It pulled it out of him. Bit by bit. Then started speaking like him. Asking where I was." She fell silent. The cold pressed harder around them. Finally, she took the bar. Unwrapped it. Bit. Her eyes stayed on the dark. "I screamed into the scrubbers. Thought it would drown the echo. But it didn't. It just bounced back. And they screamed too." She chewed slowly, mechanically. Like the act was foreign or distant. Holt adjusted the radiant core's output. Scanned the environmental readouts. Wind velocity had dropped by 4%. That wasn't natural. Outside, something moved. It wasn't the storm. The vibration came through the floor. A soft groan. Then the faint, unmistakable skitter of weight across plating. Multiple contacts. Evenly spaced. Holt's rifle reassembled in 3 seconds. He snapped the mag into place, rose, and killed the headlamp. Darkness folded over them. Only the amber pulse remained. 10 seconds. Dark. 10 seconds. Light. Cora pressed flat to the wall. Holt dropped into a crouch near the tunnel entrance, weapon braced. The sound returned, chitin on alloy. Not a random search pattern. A line formation. Probing. Then came the signal. Not a shriek. Not a word. A modulation in pitch too low for human hearing, but it vibrated through the structure. Subsonic. Deliberate. Holt felt it in his teeth. The scent followed. Rot and resin. Like something pulled from a flooded trench and left in the sun too long. Faint, but unmistakable. Amber light flickered. A shape. Tall. Too narrow. Its posture bent in the middle like a hinge. It stood just outside the tunnel's mouth. Gone in the next pulse. Holt raised the rifle. 10 seconds. Dark. Then a breath. But not from the tunnel. Behind them. He turned in a single pivot. Cora was already moving, low and silent. Behind the radiant core, a second tunnel, one neither had accounted for. Emergency maintenance access. Not mapped on the standard blueprints. The sound of wet limbs sliding across conduit plating. Holt fired. The muzzle flash turned the chamber into a burst of daylight. The thing recoiled mid-lunge. Its body was segmented, armored in wet glass-like plates, limbs jointed wrong. One arm ended in a thresher of bone hooks. The round took it high in the torso, spinning it sideways. Cora threw the radiant core like a flare. It shattered against the wall, flaring magnesium blue. Light bloomed. The swarm form twisted, legs kicking. It shrieked, not from pain. A signal. Holt shot it again. The scream stopped. Then came the answer. From above. From the corridor. From the dark beyond the tunnel. 3 more echoes. Skittering. Clicking. Cora crawled to the side, eyes locked on Holt. He nodded once. Run. She did. He followed, switching to burst fire. Behind them, the corridor lit with pulse grenades of flashes of white-blue cascading through the dust. The sounds of pursuit were erratic. One above. One fast. One slow and dragging. The hallway narrowed. Holt turned and fired blind. Ricochets filled the space. A form fell, limbs folding inward. Another screamed. They reached a blast door. Holt slammed the lock panel. Nothing. Dead. Cora threw herself sideways and began prying a maintenance port open. Her fingers were fast. Mechanical. Holt covered her. A shadow passed the corner, the tip of a limb reaching, groping. The door opened. They slammed it shut behind them. Silence. Then a scrape. Then nothing. They collapsed on the other side, lungs burning. Cora pressed her back to the wall, chest heaving. Holt knelt beside the blast door, still holding the rifle. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she looked at him. Just once. Just long enough. And for the first time since Vorthyx began, her shoulders didn't tremble. Dark. But alive. The blast door's locking teeth hissed into place with a metallic finality. Holt stayed crouched beside it, one hand pressed to the steel, listening for vibration. Nothing followed. No scraping. No claws. Just the distant groan of shifting structure as the wind outside rearranged the upper layers of snow and bone. The corridor they'd sealed themselves into was an old engineering transit shaft, long since decommissioned. The air smelled of corrosion and polymer dust. Stripped conduits lined the walls, most of them chewed open by time or infestation. Pale frost hung from ceiling ribs in long, translucent teeth. It was the kind of place that had outlived its purpose but hadn't yet died, kept upright by inertia and cold. Cora moved first. She pulled herself upright with a grunt and limped to the nearest access panel, wiping her palm across the frost to check the schematic engraving. She didn't ask where they were. She read the map, traced it with 2 fingers, and nodded once. Then turned. East section. Near the fusion sink, she said. We can cross back through the coolant trench if the bulkhead holds. Holt didn't speak. He followed. They moved slowly, rifles angled, boots soft against the trembling steel. Every surface here had been stripped bare by retreat. No spare parts. No ammunition. No bodies. Just absence. Cora walked with practiced purpose, pausing at each junction to listen. She didn't wait for Holt to lead. They passed a maintenance closet warped inward from a blast. Inside, the remains of 2 pressure suits were fused into the floor. One had scratched tally marks into the wall with a broken knife tip. For groups of 7. Then a final stroke. Holt paused long enough to mark it on his wrist pad. Then kept moving. The deeper they went, the colder the structure grew. Condensation formed on the inside of Holt's visor despite thermal filters. His HUD began to flicker in the corners. Atmospheric saturation nearing critical. No active air scrubbers this deep. They were in what the old techs called the dead depth. The station's bones showed here. No bulkheads. No reinforcement layers. Just the raw architectural veins of a place that had once meant something. Power channels long empty. Walls stitched with rust. Scratch notations in human shorthand and swarm script alike, mixed like graffiti. This way, Cora said. She slipped through a side hatch and into a vertical shaft, climbing hand over hand up a ladder encrusted with crystalline frost. Holt followed, each footfall silent, breath fogging in his helmet. At the top, the shaft opened into a narrow loading corridor, once a staging area for heavy crates during the Outpost's operational era. Rusted crates still lined the walls. A broken loader drone lay tipped on its side, limbs splayed like a fallen insect. One of its optics still blinked intermittently, looping a death command. A single overhead light flickered weakly, powered by a decaying microcell. The pulse of light made the silence worse. This was where they started falling back, Cora said quietly. She knelt beside a crate and brushed off a sheet of emergency insulation. Beneath it, blood. Frozen, blackened. drag marks leading to a shattered security checkpoint. They thought it was one swarm. They didn't know there were layers. Holt crouched beside her. The blood trail ended at a locked door, half-blasted. A spent grenade casing lay on the floor beside a severed hand. Human. Still wearing a command ring. He reached down and pulled the ring free. Cora didn't flinch. He turned it over in his palm. Captain Seal. UNMC Forward Logistics Command. He tried to seal it from the inside, Cora said. Didn't know they were already behind him. Holt said nothing. He slid the ring into a compartment on his chest plate. They moved through the checkpoint. Cora activated a short-range scanner and swept the perimeter. The device pulsed against the walls with a low, rhythmic click. Once it pinged. Not movement. Residue. Faint swarm biofilm across a wall vent dried to a crystalline crust. Days old. No longer active but no less ominous. This whole wing was a retreat funnel, she said. They rigged explosives here. Tried to collapse it. But the charges went off early. They got caught between the walls. Anyone survive? Holt asked. Cora looked down at the scanner. Just me. They found the fusion trench 3 corridors down. The coolant had long since frozen, creating a narrow crystalline canyon that glowed faintly with residual radiation. The ice hummed with trapped charge, spiderwebbed with cracks from seismic shifts. The air here was sharp, chemically dry. They crossed on a rusted catwalk, each step creaking under their weight. Holt led now, rifle up, scanning the trench below. Halfway across, he stopped. Movement. Far below in the trench. A shape. No more than a silhouette. Slowly shifting beneath the ice. Its contours didn't flow like a creature. It pulsed. As if breathing through frost. Not approaching. Waiting. A watcher. Holt felt his hand tighten on the grip. Not from fear. From recognition. Something down there knew it had been seen and let itself be seen. A message sent by absence. He moved on. They reached a control room embedded in the trench's far wall. The door had no lock, just a manual lever, its hydraulics stiff from neglect. Holt forced it open with a grunt. Inside, the room was blackened. Console banks along the walls bore charred handprints. The floor was scorched in concentric circles, blast pattern. Pressure wave from a failed containment release. Cora entered and immediately moved to the primary console. She didn't ask. She just knelt, opened her pack, and pulled out a bypass cable. Holt stood at the door, weapon ready. The console lit. Flickering. Barely alive. Lines of data rolled slowly. Local systems. Failed relays. Null oxygen output. Dead comms tree. Holt watched her fingers dance over the interface too fast for someone her age. But not messy. Not guessing. She paused. Then narrowed her eyes. A pulse. A single active signal barely alive. Local transmission source, she murmured. Originating from sublevel 1 comms spine. High-frequency burst. UNMC. Holt asked. No. She turned the display. Holt leaned closer. The signal was shaped. Encoded. Not just noise. A swarm script pattern, recursive. Designed to mimic signal handshakes from human broadcast protocols. It began to shift. The lines unraveled and restructured themselves across the interface. First as waveform. Then as grid. Then as glyph. The glyphs pulsed with bioelectric rhythm, flickering like breath caught mid-speech. One glyph sharpened. Translated. Holt. The name emerged slowly, not typed, built. Layered like sediment. Pixel by pixel, spliced from archived signal fragments, voice print samples, and UNMC comms tags. Holt stepped closer to the screen. His jaw clenched. The temperature in the room felt colder. Cora looked at him. They're speaking, she said. Her voice was low now. Afraid in a way she hadn't been since the breach. Not to each other. She tapped a key. The signal pulse repeated. Another word built itself below the first. Come. Holt didn't respond at first. Then his voice, flat, quiet, cut the silence. They want me to listen. Cora looked at the screen. Then back at him. What happens if you do? The console flickered. The name pulsed again. Holt. Then the signal went dead. Just static. And silence that felt like waiting. The signal was gone, but it left a shape behind. On the dead console screen, static rolled in soft vertical lines, each column tremoring like breath held too long. Cora tapped the interface again, fingers careful, as if touching something once alive. No reply, no repeat. Holt watched the screen without blinking. Nothing about the signal was random. It had built itself from human language, not just vocabulary but rhythm, pauses, stress, even breath cadence. Holt had once spent a year intercepting swarm field traffic in the orbital cold of Veridon 9. That chatter had been raw, chaotic. Twitch speed pulses like clustered insect clicks. This wasn't that. This was mimicry. But not just mimicry. It was remembrance. He stepped back from the console, gaze still locked. The signal knew his name. And not just the letters. The tone. The cadence. It had called. Behind him, Cora stood slowly. "It's not bait," she said. "No." "Then what is it?" "A test." A low vibration passed through the floor. It didn't rattle steel or shake dust loose. It was more subtle than that, like the outpost exhaling. Holt turned his head slowly toward the walls. Nothing moved. Then a second pulse. Not seismic. Biological. He turned to Cora. "We're moving." They left the control room through a north corridor that sloped sharply upward, following a maintenance route that zigzagged toward the midsection. Holt took point. The metal under their boots had begun to moan. Not from stress, but resonance. The kind of frequency that carried through hull bone and made every nerve fire wrong. The second wave had begun. The walls seemed to sweat. Not liquid, but a kind of biocondensation. Threads of fibrous material traced the floor in branching veins. Not yet alive, but not inert either. As they moved, Holt noticed that none of the veins crossed their path. It was as if the swarm was waiting to finish the structure after they passed. They passed an old personnel node choked with collapsed ceiling panels. Beneath one panel, Holt spotted a rusted medkit still sealed in its biofoam. He pulled it free, checked the seal, and slid it into Cora's pack. As she closed the zipper, her fingers brushed something tucked in the lining. An old photo tag, scratched and warped. It showed a boy, maybe 12, in a UNMC maintenance jumpsuit. He had her eyes. She pocketed it without a word. "They know this route," she said, voice low. "They know all the routes. Why not just collapse it?" Holt didn't answer, because that wasn't the objective anymore. They emerged into a gallery junction, an octagonal chamber surrounded by shattered viewports. On a clearer day, it would have faced the ridge. Now the glass was opaque with frost and ice-laced fungal growth. Veins of gray mold traced the inner seams of the wall panels like fossilized circuitry. Cora crouched by one of the floor vents and ran her fingers just over the grill. "Heat. Faint." Holt leaned beside her and unslung his rifle. Movement below. Just one. But large. They froze. The grate began to pulse with a rhythm that mimicked heartbeat. Then it stopped. They didn't breathe. When it didn't return, Holt backed off. "They're not rushing." Cora nodded slowly. "They're letting us get where they want." A long silence followed. Then a single sound. A scrape, not metal but organic, like chitin drawing across meat. From above. They moved again. They climbed through broken service ducts and silent crawl spaces, reaching a collapsed hangar bulkhead 3 levels up. This had once been a minor vehicle bay, but now it was gutted. Hull plating and strut beams had fallen in on themselves like a crushed lung. In the center, something burned slowly. A mound of swarm biomass, half-frozen, pulsing with faint bioluminescence. It was feeding on the hull metal, digesting its shape, reforming its structure into something Holt couldn't yet recognize. The air was thick here, warm, smelling of copper and fermentation. Cora crouched low. "They're making a relay." "For what?" "To call more." Holt knelt behind a toppled girder and retrieved the last of his demolition charges. 2 left. "Can you rig a delay?" She nodded. 3 minutes. Maybe 4. They worked in silence. Holt slid between struts, planting charges beneath the relay mass. Pulsed under his hand. Not random. Responsive. He felt it watching. Cora rewired the detonator into a manual loop. Her hands were steady, but her eyes were wide. The organic mass began to emit a low vibration, a frequency that echoed inside their helmets, brushing the edges of comprehension. Then came the sound. Choral. Like 1,000 human voices trapped in a throat, trying to harmonize. Glitches in tone. Layers of vocal data stitched together. Some parts screamed. Others wept. Cora flinched. Her hand jerked slightly on the wire. Holt caught her wrist. "Ignore it. They're using his voice," she whispered. He didn't ask whose. He just finished the circuit. They ran. The explosion came 3 minutes later. A deep, slow implosion that didn't shake the walls so much as mute them. The sound died like a breath held too long. The choral broke mid-syllable. Then silence. They didn't speak. Cora's hands were shaking as they crouched in the access crawlway. She wiped them on her coat, but her breathing stuttered. "He used to hum while fixing the power trunk," she murmured. Holt said nothing, but his eyes never left the dark corridor ahead. They regrouped in the dorsal access hall, breathing hard, gear lighter than it had been. The walls here bore no graffiti, no frost, just clean steel and long burn lines. This was a place where something old had died hard and never been remembered. A forgotten place even the swarm had not yet repurposed. Cora slumped against the wall. That wasn't their main push. No. Then where is it? Holt turned toward the sealed corridor ahead. Above the threshold, a faded marking. Reactor core, authorized access only. And beneath it, scrawled in hand-cut lettering, "This is where the fire went out." Holt stepped forward, hand brushing the door. The metal was warm. He froze for a fraction of a second. Something moved in his chest. Not fear, not yet, but recognition. The pulse in the steel matched his own. They moved forward in silence. The second wave had arrived, but it had not yet begun. The corridor to the reactor core narrowed by degrees, walls bowing inward like ribs pressed by pressure. The light from Holt's helmet beam painted fractures in the plating, catching on stress lines and melted struts. The temperature was rising slowly, unnaturally. Beneath the metal floor, faint tremors rolled like breath drawn through a throat too long collapsed. No signals, no swarm movement, no light but their own. And yet the silence felt inhabited. Cora walked behind him, quiet, measured. Her earlier tremble was gone, but her posture had changed. Tense, head low, eyes always moving. She wasn't just watching for threat. She was listening. Every few paces she would stop and touch the wall, fingers spread wide, eyes closed like she could hear something in the alloy. Holt didn't ask what she felt. He recognized the motion. Infantry did it too, when they weren't sure if a bunker was breathing. They reached the outer chamber of the core. A spherical atrium opened before them, 30 meters across, ringed by shattered control consoles and scaffolds that dangled like broken ribs. Long-burned safety markers glowed faint amber along the floor, flickering as though struggling to remember their purpose. Conduits hung from the walls like torn muscle, and high above, the ceiling had fractured into a jagged halo of shadow. At its center, the fusion core, cold, dim, still intact. It should have been dead, but it pulsed. A heartbeat, slow, deep. Holt stepped forward onto the grated platform. The fusion housing rose 10 meters above him, blackened and vein-laced. Where coolant lines should have been, there were now long, root-like cords of pale organic matter. They twisted upward into the housing, vanishing into the metal like they had grown there. Energy monitors embedded in Holt's HUD began to pulse, failing to identify the source. Biological but sustained. Faint radiation bleed. Not lethal yet. Beneath the biological growth, something mechanical still lived, or had been reawakened. Cora froze at the threshold. Her breath caught. Holt! Her voice was small, dry. He turned. She was staring at the far wall. A figure stood there. It wasn't moving. It wasn't alive. But it had a face. His, mummified, stitched from biofilm and alloy scrap. Its chest was a twisted panel bearing his UNMC insignia. Its hand, fleshless, bone and cable, was raised in a motionless salute. The positioning was precise. Military perfect. Holt didn't speak. He approached. The thing didn't react. It wasn't connected to the floor. It hung from the ceiling by filament strands, as if grown into position. A sculpture. A message. The face was uncanny. Stitched muscle, vacant sockets, jaw slightly open as if waiting to speak. As he stood beneath it, the fusion core pulsed again. And with it came a sound. Not speech. Signal. Raw. Low frequency. Too deep for speakers. Came through the floor, through the boots, into the bone. A code. He knew the rhythm. Morse. One word. Stay. Cora backed away. Holt stepped closer. The fusion housing began to glow. Faint, pulsing bands of orange-red filtered through its base. The root lines feeding into it twitched like tendons, responding to unseen stimulus. His HUD flared again. Unknown protocol detected. Error loop initiated. The display flickered, scrambled. Not random. It started spelling his name. Cholt. Then a second pulse. Another signal. You. Remember. Something dropped onto the gantry behind them with a wet thud. They turned. Nothing there. Just residue. A trail of glistening membrane across the floor, evaporating in seconds. A rush of air shook the gantries. Something high above dislodged, rattled down the scaffolding, and shattered across the grating. The mummified thing that wore his face began to twitch. Not in rhythm. In pain. The head jerked sideways. One arm lifted mechanically, then dropped. His jaw stretched too wide. Cora cried out. And then came the sound. Not static. Not choral. Whispers. Overlapping. 1,000 fractured phrases. Cora's voice. Holt's voice. Voices from the log feeds they'd recovered. From field recordings. Training simulations. Debriefs. All speaking to them. One sentence looped louder than the rest. We kept the part that screamed last. Cora covered her ears, but not in panic. She closed her eyes, forced breath through her nose, grounded herself like she had done in the bunkers. Her lips moved silently, counting, repeating something only she could hear. Holt stepped forward. The reactor's glow intensified. The veins running through the core turned from red to white. His knees buckled slightly. A scent hit him, motor oil and citrus cleanser. Exactly the mix from the barracks staging hall on Vorthyx, where his squad prepped before their last drop. He'd been here before. The moment clicked together like broken gears grinding into alignment. The heat, the architecture, the smell. Vorthyx core. He'd led a recon unit through here during the first weeks of the collapse. They'd never made it back. He'd never filed the loss report. But the swarm had. And now the system spoke in their absence. We didn't learn you. We became you. The reactor doors behind the core hissed. A circular aperture split open, seamless, silent. And beyond it, darkness. Not black, not empty, reflective. Something inside moved exactly when Holt moved. But it wasn't his reflection. Cora gripped his arm. We can't stay. But the reactor pulsed again. Stay. And this time the word wasn't code. It was voice. His voice. Speaking back at him from inside the reactor. Calling itself home. They crossed the threshold together. The doorway led into a circular chamber without seams, welds, or visible exits. Walls of dark composite curved in perfect arcs coated with a film like wet glass. The light from Holt's suit refracted strangely here, bending into threads that danced across the surface as if resisting clarity. The air tasted like ozone and copper. It was warm. Too warm. The sound of the reactor behind them faded, swallowed whole. Holt turned once, no door. No signal. No direction. Just the chamber. He marked it on his HUD. No response. Cora knelt beside one wall, touched it with her gloved palm. The surface didn't resist, but it wasn't solid either. Her hand pressed in just slightly, like skin. She withdrew it fast. This room wasn't built, she whispered. It was grown. She was right. The textures weren't fabricated. The lines weren't cut, they had formed. Subsurface lattice veins pulsed beneath the walls like vascular memory. Holt crouched beside her, laid his palm to the surface. It was warm and wet, but the wetness didn't spread. It remained constant, controlled. They moved slowly, mapping the space by movement. Each step triggered faint vibrations beneath the floor. Not alarms, not defense. Something listening. Then, the crown emerged. From the center of the room, a slow rise in the floor. No machinery, no mechanism. The metal simply shifted shape like a wound closing in reverse. And there, rising from the center, was the device. Roughly the size of a helmet. Suspended in midair by nothing. Not powered, not anchored. Just there. It wasn't a crown in the ceremonial sense. No gold. No jewels. But the implication was unmistakable. A radial pattern of blackened alloy ribs, each one curved like a jawbone, spiraling inward toward a hollow center. Inside the hollow, light, Not projected. Not sourced. Remembered. The air thickened as they drew closer. Not pressure. Meaning. The chamber watched. Cora stepped back. She'd seen enough sacred architecture in dead colonies to know reverence by feel. Holt moved forward. As he approached, the ribs of the crown rotated. Slow. Precise. One rotation per breath. The inner light flared, brief, searing. Holt flinched. In that flash, he saw. Not with eyes. With memory. Fire teams screaming in sub-level 3. Static calls unanswered. Holt's voice ordering fallback. And a figure, one of his own, falling, swallowed by darkness as Holt sealed the exit. The memory wasn't false. But it wasn't his alone anymore. He stumbled backward, heart racing. Cora caught him. What did it show you? Something I didn't want to remember. She nodded. Then it knows what matters. He looked into her face. There was no judgment. Just recognition. She too had seen ghosts walk beside her. The crown pulsed again. Then a voice, not external, not auditory. Internal. A resonance in Holt's skull. Command is not inherited. It is absorbed. Cora gasped and turned. Another figure stood at the far side of the chamber. Not swarm. Not human. Something in between. Its shape borrowed Holt's posture, Cora's height, the gestures of officers long dead. Its skin shimmered like wet graphite, morphing with breath. Its eyes did not glow but reflected perfectly. Whoever looked into them saw themselves reduced to intent. It bowed its head slightly. To lead, one must, let go. The echo stuttered faintly. Not robotic, just wrong. A language learned backward. Behind it, the wall opened like an iris. A corridor waited. Lit not by light, but by memory. The crown did not move, but its signal pressed into Holt's chest like gravity. Choose. It struck like a wave, soundless, unstoppable. Holt clenched his jaw as the word tore through muscle memory and spinal rhythm. His HUD flickered. His throat tightened. He felt a weight pressed behind his eyes, not pain but familiarity. The kind that comes after forgetting something for too long. He stepped back to Cora, chest tight. I think it's offering command, he said. Cora shook her head. No. It's offering replacement. She pointed at the corridor. That thing, it's already part of you. It took pieces. Now it wants to finish. Holt turned to face the crown again. Another flash. Another scene. His face bloodied, shouting into a comlink as a wall of flesh slammed into the outer defenses. Then, a different image. Cora, years younger, hiding in a ventilation shaft, clutching a child's stuffed drone. Watching her brother scream as a shape took his voice. Then, a corridor. Silent. Dark. Holt walking down it. Not alone. And then nothing. The crown dimmed. The hybrid figure stepped aside. The iris door expanded. He rolled out. Inside, the walls weren't walls. They were layers. Transparent, looping, mimicking memory. As Holt stepped toward it, he saw himself passing on the other side, an echo delayed by seconds. Cora stepped forward too, but the air pushed her back. Gently, as if saying, not yet. I'm not supposed to follow you, she whispered. No, Holt said. You're not supposed to come back either. He looked at her one last time, then closed his eyes, breathed once, and stepped into the corridor. The walls closed behind him. The corridor was silent but not still. Its walls breathed. They expanded and contracted with each of Holt's steps like lungs synced to his pace. No texture, no seams, only translucent layers that shimmered with fragments of light, not reflections but moments. His moments. 1,000 images flickered around him, looping and diverging. Some he remembered. Others he had buried. A few had never happened. Not to him. But he felt them anyway. Each memory brushed against him as he passed, as if seeking attention. Some slid past gently. Others pressed with hunger. The chamber around him pulsed with them, layered histories converging on one man's spine. A memory of orbit over Karen Delta. Escape pods blooming like spores as fire gutted the hull. Holt stood at the observation window of a command module he'd never been inside. He'd never served there. But he felt the weight of sealing the hatch. The guilt of a voice cut off mid-sentence. Then another flash. A swarm drone split open on an operating slab. Its internals were soft but responsive. Its central node pulsed in a rhythm that matched Holt's own heartbeat. He stood beside it, speaking words in a swarm tongue. Words he'd never learned. Explaining anatomy in diagrams he'd never seen. He wasn't dreaming. He was remembering what the swarm had remembered of him. The corridor turned without moving. It didn't bend or shift, the space itself chose a new direction. Reality rearranged to lead him somewhere he hadn't yet earned. He walked, because there was nowhere else to go. Sound returned like memory surfacing from water. A voice. His own. From years ago. A debrief transcript. But it played wrong. The tone shifted mid-sentence. The words looped. Then reversed. Then collided with another recording. Holt talking to command during the Vorthyx breach. Then overlaid with a broadcast he'd sent from a recon post in the Sharon ruins. The memories were crashing into one another. Splicing. Recombining. Reinforced the primary, casualties too high to breach and hold. He shut his eyes. The corridor opened. The chamber beyond was circular. Vast. It felt like a place meant for command and burial. At once a war room and a grave. 10 hollow constructs floated in the center. Not projections. Sculptures of light and intent. Each played in silence. One showed Holt commanding a squad extraction under fire. Another showed him failing to spot the triple shadow pattern that signaled a swarm ambush. Others captured the quiet moments, his hands shaking after giving the kill order. The way he looked at a blank terminal long after comms had gone dark. These weren't simulations. They were confessions. Around the chamber, the walls showed other faces. Cora's. Her brothers. The captain Holt had pulled the ring from. The scientist who sent the first distress call. Swarm hybrids who looked almost human. Ghosts animated by memory. And in the center, a figure. It wore his face. Not stitched. Not copied. Reconstructed. It was him. All of him. From every recorded angle. From helmet feeds, debrief footage, combat AI logs, swarm signal interception, every scrap of image and sound. Compressed. Aggregated. Perfect. But not alive. The mirrored figure didn't move at first. It watched. Head tilted. Calculating. Then it stepped forward. You are not here to win. Its voice wasn't Holt's. It was the sum of Holt's. Every modulation of tone. Every scream, whisper, command, curse. All blended into one resonance. It didn't speak like a man. It spoke like a memory that had grown teeth. You are here to choose which memory will shape us. The words vibrated through the floor. Holt clenched his fists. I didn't come here to build anything. That is why we brought you. The mirrored figure gestured. The chamber changed. Now it showed not Holt's memories, but Cora's. Her silence during the siege. The moment she heard her brother's scream echo in her own voice. Her escape through the flood ducts. Her nightmares. Her endurance. Her moments of decision. And beneath them all, a signal pattern. Echoing. Matching the pulse of the crown. Holt stepped forward. The mirrored self raised its hand. A sphere of light formed between them. Inside, the outpost. Holt. Cora. The swarm. All events branching in loops of possibility. Each strand was a potential future drawn not from data but from memory. They were imagined based on belief, not statistics. In one branch, Holt turned away from the reactor and fled with Cora. In another, he donned the crown and led a strike force of hybrid swarm against the next incursion. In another still, he died. But his death became myth coded into the swarm's next evolution. Choose the one to keep, the figure said. It didn't demand. It waited. The chamber fell silent. Every version of himself stared back at him. Cora's voice emerged, not from outside, but from one of the memory branches. She was older. Hardened. Addressing a group of children in a ruined training hall. The swarm didn't take him. He went willingly. Because someone had to. Another version, Cora weeping alone over Holt's empty armor. Another, she leads an expedition years later, bearing the sigil of the hollow crown on her shoulder. All futures required a cost. But only one would become real. Holt stepped toward the sphere. He hesitated. Not from fear. From clarity. The memory of Cora holding the stuffed drone. The resonance of a scream that wasn't his. A choice that could no longer be avoided. His hand moved, not reaching, but closing. A clenched fist held over the sphere. And in that moment of decision, the sphere pulsed. The mirrored self tilted its head again. And for the first time, it smiled. Not from joy. From closure. Because it already knew which future Holt would choose. Because it had already been made. By memory. And by war. Light did not return. There was no transition. No burst of clarity. No epiphany. Only the fading of the chamber, and with it, the sense of Holt as separate. He floated not in water, not in vacuum, but in something conceptual. A medium made of signal, thought, memory. His limbs drifted beyond perception. His breath dissolved. There was no pain. Only presence. Voices threaded through the dark. Cora's laughter, once distant, faded. Her voice whispering, don't stop. His own, older, colder, we hold here. No fallback. And then others. Not human. Not separate. A chorus built from all that had passed through the swarm. Insectal. Mechanical. Emotional. They did not speak to him. They were him. A trillion signal paths converging into a single, remembering point. Then came the return. He woke on his knees. The chamber was gone. The light above him was real. Pale. Gray. Cold. Diffused through clouds that hung low and unmoving, like the sky itself had forgotten how to breathe. He stood slowly. He was in the ruins of the outpost. Same foundation. Same layout. But different. Dead. The ferrocrete walls were softened by time. The swarm's biomechanical growths had turned to stone, hollow, veined, petrified mid-breath. Where once organs had pulsed and walls had murmured, there was only brittle shell. Dust covered everything like ash. The corridors had caved in at irregular intervals, buckled beneath time or retribution. Doors hung half open, exposed to frost and silence. One long hall still bore scorch marks from plasma discharge. His plasma, or another's, it no longer mattered. He stepped through the debris. His foot cracked a shell casing. A faded tag, half buried beneath rubble, bore a name he didn't recognize. The outpost had been reclaimed by the indifference of time. The command center was gone, replaced by a shallow crater of blackened glass and fused bones. No signal towers, no relays. But something had grown from its center, a single spire, 5 meters tall, crafted not of stone or metal, but fossilized memory. Its shape echoed the crown. Not as a weapon. As a monument. Its surface shimmered with trapped image light. Faces surfaced faintly in the material, soldiers, civilians, hybrid forms. Holt's own eyes closed in sleep. Not holograms. Impressions. Fossils of identity encoded into the structure. The air around it vibrated softly like breath remembered in the dark. He reached out. It pulsed faintly beneath his hand. Not alive. Not functional. Just remembering. And so was he. He caught his reflection in a fractured bulkhead panel. The man who looked back was changed. His armor, though scorched, bore the mark of integration. It was no longer UNMC issue. No longer tactical. It had adapted, grown, reformed. The sigil on his chest plate was circular, threaded with jagged lines. A hollow ring within a ring. The hollow crown. For a moment, he didn't move. He felt the world around him press inward. Not with hostility, but with weight. Memory had shape now. It held him. He turned slowly. Something in the air shifted. A crunch behind him, footsteps, not hostile, not uncertain. And behind him, she waited. Cora. Older. Weathered. The rifle slung across her back was not UNMC issue. Its barrel had been modified. The stock hand-carved. Markings etched by hand, not code, but story. Every groove spoke of years. She stood in silence. Her mouth parted. No sound. Her eyes shimmered. Not with tears, but with too many words held too long. Is it you? She asked. He nodded. She didn't move. The silence stretched. Between them lay more than time. Decisions. Sacrifices. A war without clean endings. I waited, she said finally. I know. She approached. Not cautiously, but deliberately. She moved like someone walking through a cathedral, each step weighted with memory. Her fingers brushed his hand. Flesh. Warm. Still human. Her eyes didn't ask. They understood. You're late, she whispered. He looked past her. Beyond the ridge, the battlefield was gone. The great trench systems were overgrown. The sky was choked with mist, but there was no movement. No sign of life. No sound. And yet he knew it wasn't empty. It was waiting. We're right on time, he said. They walked together. Past husks of carrier drones half swallowed by the earth. Past old barracks turned into shrines where helmets sat in neat rows, each with a candle burned down to waxy nubs. There was no command now. Only memory. They passed a child, maybe 10, watching from a distance. Dirty, cautious. Holding a radio shaped like a toy. It pulsed once, briefly, then went quiet again. Cora nodded to him. The child vanished behind a support strut. A new generation. One that didn't need orders. Only stories. At the edge of the ruins, they stopped. The wind was rising now. Carrying not threat, but signal. Low, buried deep beneath the threshold of sound. The swarm was not gone. It had simply changed. It had remembered. And waited. And now it would learn. Holt looked to Cora. She raised her head. And for the first time since the fall, she smiled. The tower still stood. What had once been a forward relay, UNMC Communications Array 17, was now cracked at the base and leaning into the wind like a wounded sentinel. The upper transceiver was sheared off. Cables trailed down like tendrils. But the dish itself still pointed at the sky. It should have fallen long ago. The outpost's highest ground had always been a place of messages. Warnings. Distress calls. Final reports. And now one more. The climb was slower than Holt remembered. Not from age or fatigue, but reverence. Each step was part of something larger. Stone gave way beneath his boots, worn by ice and ash. The wind clawed at him, bitter and relentless, tugging at the folds of his coat like a thing trying to pull him back. Cora followed several meters behind. Her path mirrored his exactly, up the slope carved by retreat, held by memory. They didn't speak. The climb didn't allow for words. When they reached the base of the tower, Holt paused. It leaned at an unnatural angle, casting a long diagonal shadow across the ridge. Rebar jutted from its foundation like ribs. The antenna was half buried in snowdrift and slag. But the platform still held. He stepped onto it, boots groaning against rusted steel. The console stood open, its guts exposed. Cables like sinew, scorched circuits smelling faintly of polymer and dust. He dropped to one knee beside it. The panel didn't light up, but he felt it respond. It wasn't power. It was presence. He removed a glove and laid one bare hand on the transmitter node. Metal met skin, and the crown beneath his armor responded. Faint at first, then pulsing. Signal bled into the relay. Not from memory sticks, not from processors. From him. Data fragments rushed up the old channels, encrypted battle orders, defunct failsafes, DNA keychains, command priority overrides. Holt's own voice logs layered through the lines, fragmented and reordered. The tower didn't resist. It had waited. Cora knelt beside him, eyes scanning the uplink. "It's working," she murmured. He nodded. "Because it remembers me." The console flickered once. Old code danced across what remained of the screen. And then something new. A glyph. Circular. 2 rings. Hollow. Interlocked. Cora inhaled slowly. "They're listening." He didn't look at her. "Not listening," he said. "Joining." Far below them, the ruins were still. The barracks where they'd fought. The trenches where hundreds had died. The relay spires that once sang warnings now stood mute, like grave markers. And scattered throughout the valley, in distant geometry only visible from above, were faint lights. They pulsed in sequences. Not random. Language. Swarm. But it wasn't just swarm anymore. Holt stood and approached the tower's mic array. A half-broken stem of carbon steel, bent low. He touched it gently, eyes never leaving the horizon. He keyed the uplink manually. The final broadcast began. UNMC command. Outpost 17. This is Captain Holt. No emotion. No hesitation. His voice was steel ground through gravel. No emergency code. No distress flag. No recovery beacon. He paused, just long enough to let silence breathe. There's nothing left to extract. No one to reclaim. This place is beyond reclamation. The wind whined across the dish. But there is something here. Cora stood beside him now. Her shadow merged with his. Something left behind. He pressed his palm against the cracked comm plate. The crown pulse bled through again. Slow, deliberate. "We remembered. And they did too." A short pause. Broadcast ends. The signal surged up through the array. The dish glowed faintly, casting arcs of broken light into the sky. Above them, the clouds parted slightly, just enough to see a column of vapor twisting upward like a trail. Then it vanished. The uplink powered down. No reply, only silence, only wind. Cora exhaled. Her breath trembled as it left her. She turned to Holt. "Do you think they'll remember what we were?" He stared out at the horizon. Lights shimmered again. Not advancing, not retreating, shifting. Patterns emerged in their glow. Geometric, human, like diagrams of ideas half-dreamed. He stepped back from the console. "No," he said quietly. "I think they'll remember what we chose to become." They descended slowly, not in retreat but return. The path wound down through old trenches and collapsed domes. Frost crusted every edge. Wind whistled through hollowed corridors like distant choirs. They passed the crown monument again. It shimmered with low light now, not from within, from the sky above. something unseen orbiting far beyond atmosphere, blinking in time. As they walked, more signs of life emerged. Children played beside collapsed signal bunkers. Someone had repainted the old UNMC insignia into a ringed circle. Less a warning, more a sigil. Grown figures, some scarred, some marked by hybrid tech, gathered near old fire pits, telling stories to others who sat in silence, listening. The war was gone, but the shape of it remained. And through that shape, something new had taken root. Not a piece, pattern. Cora slowed. Some of this feels like it's always been here. Holt shook his head. It hasn't. We just remember it that way. She didn't argue. Ahead, on a ridge where the sky met broken earth, a new structure was rising. Not steel, not flesh, memory. Stone plates arranged in radial patterns. Signal coils woven through roots. Wind chimes made from salvaged casings and signal disks, spinning slow and soft. A tower of signal and silence, built by hands that remembered both ruin and resurrection. And from its base, an antenna rose, not to warn, but to listen, to receive, to wait, and to tell the next story.